Hey everyone, and welcome to This Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we're diving into something that literally affects every single one of us, the science behind why we act the way we do in relationships. Seriously, if you've ever found yourself totally baffled by your own romantic behaviors, like wanting to change your name and flee the country just because a date went really, really well, or if you've just wondered why building a deep connection sometimes feels so incredibly hard, well, you're in the right place. We're going to look closely at the actual data and the psychology behind human bonding.
I want you to take a second and really think about this question. Why do we crave intimacy, but then push it away the second it arrives? It's kind of a profound contradiction, right? I mean, we are biologically wired to need other people, yet so many of us build these massive invisible walls to keep everyone out. You might recognize this in yourself, or maybe you've dealt with a partner who suddenly goes ice cold right when things start getting real. To understand this push and pull, we actually need to look at the academic framework that maps out our feelings. And that framework is known as attachment theory. Originally formulated by psychologists John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, this model gives us a lens to understand our adult emotional connections by looking way back at our earliest ones. The core premise here is absolutely fascinating and, honestly, maybe a little bit intimidating. Basically, the way you were held and comforted as a tiny baby essentially laid the invisible wiring for exactly how you text your partner back today. Wild, right? Let's take a quick look at how this science evolved. Back in the mid-20th century, Bowlby and Ainsworth were strictly studying babies and their caregivers. But the science didn't stay in the nursery forever. The massive aha moment came in the 1980s, when brilliant minds like Sue Johnson, Cindy Hazen, and Philip Shaver realized something pretty crazy. Adults throwing tantrums over unrequited love actually look an awful lot like toddlers crying out for their moms. We seek our partners out for comfort, and we get anxious when they aren't there. Then, by 1991, researchers Bartholomew and Horwitz formally mapped this whole thing out into the four-category model of adult attachment that we still use today. Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1, the 4 attachment styles. First off, let's establish a baseline by contrasting secure attachment with insecure attachments. Securely attached folks generally have a really positive view of themselves and of others. They form long-term relationships pretty easily, and crucially, this is the big one, they don't absolutely panic if a text goes unanswered for an hour. Everyday conflict just doesn't overwhelm them. On the flip side, the insecure styles are marked by this constant, exhausting internal struggle. These individuals might desperately seek validation, live in total fear of rejection, or go to the complete opposite extreme by actively suppressing their emotions just to maintain their independence. And this brilliantly illustrates how your attachment style isn't just random. It's actually born from a simple combination of two things: how you view yourself and how you view the world around you. If both of those are positive, boom, you're secure. But the moment doubt creeps in, the whole model shifts. So if you view others positively but yourself negatively, you become anxious, preoccupied. If you view yourself positively but you distrust others, you become dismissive, avoidant. And finally, if you view both yourself and others negatively, you fall right into that fearful, avoidant category. Let's compare the two most common insecure styles directly. The anxious, preoccupied individual often comes from a childhood where care was sporadic or inconsistent. So as an adult, they crave intimacy, but they're constantly haunted by the fear that their partner doesn't really want them. A single delayed message can literally send them spiraling into worry. And then we have the dismissive avoidant. This usually stems from a childhood where caregivers were, well, dismissive, teaching the kid to rely only on themselves. Fast forward to adulthood, they prioritize independence above all else and instinctively create emotional distance or totally ghost the exact moment a relationship starts feeling a little too serious. Then there's the final style, fearful avoidant, which is sometimes called disorganized attachment. This one is the least common style, and unfortunately, it very often stems from early childhood trauma. I want you to imagine the internal battle these folks face every single day. They desperately seek close relationships, but at the same time, they are absolutely terrified of them. Because they have a negative view of both themselves and everyone else, they get caught in this incredibly painful push and pull dynamic, driven by a severe fear of abandonment. Eventually, they might just shut down entirely to protect themselves. All right, moving on to section 2. The trap of avoidance. To really understand why some of us prefer to stay out of the way, we have to look at the emotional origin of avoidance. And very often, it comes down to something called childhood emotional neglect, or CEN. This happens when parents fail to respond adequately to a child's emotional needs. Now, it is absolutely vital to note here that this usually happens quietly, invisibly, and mostly without any malicious intent from the parents. They might provide a perfectly safe physical home, food on the table, but by failing to listen to or validate the child's internal world, they inadvertently teach the kid that feelings are irrelevant, or worse, that they're just a sign of weakness. The source material summarizes the impact of this beautifully. When you grow up this way, you grow up feeling invisible. Emotional neglect basically trains a child to avoid feeling, to avoid expressing, and to avoid needing things. It teaches them to shut down the very things that make us the most human. So, do you recognize any of these subtle symptoms of avoidance? They really do hide in plain sight. It looks like secretly feeling inferior and constantly battling shame. It looks like just assuming people are judging you, or strategically bailing on plans before anyone gets too close. The real tragedy here is that these intense fears can exist entirely on the inside. Outwardly, the person just soldiers on, seeming totally fine and normal, while internally, they are meticulously micromanaging exactly how close they let the world get to them. And all of those symptoms, they're driven by one really painful consequence of childhood emotional neglect. Our source calls it the fatal flaw. It is this deep, powerful feeling that you are just not as valid as everyone else. It's that quiet, persistent belief that somehow, on some fundamental level, you just don't matter as much. This acts like a heavy anchor pulling you away from intimacy. It makes the idea of vulnerability feel incredibly, incredibly dangerous. So, the crucial point here is that we have to fundamentally reframe how we look at avoidance. It is not some inherent personality defect. Avoidance is actually a brilliant but incredibly outdated childhood survival mechanism. You developed it because you literally needed it to survive the emotional environment of your early life. It kept you safe. But over time, because it was the only tool you had in your toolkit, it became your adult signature move. It's simply protective armor that you, kind of forgot how to take off. Which brings us to Section 3, changing your working model. Now, what's really interesting about the data on this slide is that while 75% of people kind of stay in their lanes and experience no significant changes in their attachment style, a massive 25% actually do experience a shift. That's 1 in 4 people. This change can happen over weeks or months, and it's often influenced by major life events, changing relationships, or just active personal development. That 25% proves a monumental point found in the research. Working models are not rigid personality traits. Actually, scratch that. They aren't really personality traits at all. Your attachment style is essentially just a set of learned expectations and thoughts about yourself and others. And because of that, it is highly malleable. What was learned can absolutely be unlearned. What was broken can be repaired. Okay, Section 4, breaking the cycle. The literature outlines a systematic, highly effective approach to becoming less avoidant. Step 1 is looking back. You need to identify exactly what you had to avoid in your childhood home. Was it anger? Was it neediness? Step 2 is radical acceptance. Realize that this is just a coping mechanism, not a life sentence. Step 3 is building awareness. Start observing and jotting down when you use avoidance today. Step 4 requires a little analysis. Notice your specific themes. Are you bailing on social events, big career goals, or just expressing your feelings? And finally, Step 5 is where the real magic happens. You have to start facing things, little by little. Awareness is a vital first step, but action is the cure. Look, avoidance feeds fear. The more you avoid something, the scarier it gets. But the inverse is powerfully true too. As the source material puts it, the more you face things, the less scary they become. This is a healthy, strong circle that is a reversal of the circle of avoidance. Facing small fears builds incredible momentum. You slowly replace that endless, exhausting loop of anxiety with an upward spiral of confidence and security. So I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge today. What is one small feeling, need, or risk you can stop avoiding right now? Seriously, it doesn't have to be massive. Maybe it's just telling a friend you're actually having a really tough day, or finally hitting send on that text you've been overthinking for hours. Take one small step toward genuine connection and begin proving to yourself that your feelings do matter and that you are perfectly capable of being seen. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll see you next time.